The term elementals is often used interchangeably with fairies, the fair folk, or the little people, which just goes to show you how much uncharted territory and mystery there still is here. At its most basic, elementals means a being of consciousness that is associated with nature. We see this concept of elementals in many different cultures throughout the world, from native North America to Celtic Europe, even into ancient Judaism. In many traditions, this time of the year was considered to be a particularly potent moment for being able to connect into these beings in the unseen realm, a time of the year where the veils between the worlds thin. I'm Asia Suhler of One Willow Apothecaries, and this is my guide to working with the elementals. Start off by saying that I was never a fairy kid growing up. I was not into the world of fairies as a young girl. And in part, this was because I internalized pretty early on the belief system, the culture that I was in, that was surrounded on this idea that intellectualism and belief in things like fairy just don't go hand in hand. It wasn't until I became an adult that I actually opened up to the idea of fairies. And it's because I realized that our world is made of consciousness and sentience. And the idea that everything that exists would be perceivable by me is actually a little bit ridiculous. That of course there's so much going on beneath my level of perception, including other consciousness that I might not be able to immediately see or perceive, but that is certainly there and here on Earth. In many places around the world, the belief in fairies still holds pretty strong. So in places like Ireland and Scotland, sometimes major roadways or developments will be routed around places where fairies are considered to live, like sacred mounds or stones. We can see that this belief in fairies goes a long way back. So who are the elementals and why work with them? The most basic definition of elementals that I like to give is this idea of beings of consciousness that are connected in with nature and the elements of the living world. Karina Blackheart, who is the founder of the Feri Tradition here in this country, says this about the fairy or elemental realm. The world of fairy is kinder, but less civilized. And to me, this is so emblematic of nature and the natural world in general, that there is vast kindness and benevolence in the world that surrounds us, but it doesn't actually march in tune to the same steps of human civilization or expectation. One of the reasons why I like working with the elementals so much is it brings me into a deeper rhythm of being here on this planet. It aligns me a little bit more fully with the natural rhythms of nature. So a lot of people, when they talk about working with elementals, will say that they're mischievous, trickstery, and I find that to be true as well. There's a lot of humor there. There's also a lot of care and a lot of wisdom. To think that we as human beings would know everything there is to know about how to be here on this planet is quite egotistical. In reality, all of the beings that make up this web of life here have so much to teach us, including the beings that exist in the other world. I've also found that the elementals are really wonderful allies for learning how to connect more deeply to the plant realm. Elementals work in conjunction with the plants in such a beautiful synchronistic way. They're kind of like these beautiful go-betweens, these matchmakers that will introduce you to plants that you want to be working with. So they're beautiful messengers to start to communicate with to really deepen your relationship to the green and growing world. How do you start connecting into these elementals? Number one would be to leave a corner of your yard wild. These beings of consciousness that are associated with nature live in nature. They live in the wild. We humans like to get our fingers into every habitat and shape and change it, but what we're doing is we're really impressing our consciousness upon that land. So leave a land space at your home that can be totally left to its own state of being and consciousness. This will be the place that will draw in the elementals to where you live. You can try visiting this place and connecting with whatever feelings or sentience are there. I particularly like meditating in those wild spaces and just see who shows up. Number 2 is to leave offerings. I like to do this in conjunction with leaving a part of my yard wild. Some offerings might include milk, honey, small crystals. Some people will get really into it and create whole little fairy altars. This is a wonderful thing to get your kids involved in. Kids love fairies. It's a fact. If it hasn't been kind of beaten out of them that somehow fairies are silly, then kids just innately love this idea of fairies. So they will be really into this idea of creating small little fairy altars, perhaps even with miniature furniture or doors, or maybe even just a small bowl and intentional crystals or stones. However you decide to create it, just know that your intention and your desire to connect is the most important thing. The third tip for connecting with the elementals is to reconnect with your inner child. Children innately believe in the unseen, partially because they're way more tuned into its perception than we are. So when we can connect into our inner child once more, we can start to open up new levels of perception. I have a really beautiful story to illustrate this. I was with one of my dearest friends and his niece, and we were playing one of her favorite games, Witches and Fairies, which is basically just an imagination game where different rooms are the rooms in which the fairies live and different rooms are the rooms inhabited by the witches. We got super imaginative in the fairy realm, going deep, deep, deep in that room into our games of fantasy and play. So deep and so intense that at one point his niece had to back out because she got a little bit scared. She scared herself. So this just goes to show you how tangible and real and thick the imagination got in that room. Well, later on that night, it was just me and my friend in the room, and we were talking about our day, talking about how much fun we had playing with his niece, and all of a sudden we heard this sound. It was like a slight buzzing going off, and then we saw this tiny little light, like a flame, move across the room as the buzzing went, and then disappear. And before I could stop the words from coming out of my mouth, I just exclaimed, "That was elemental." At the time, I wasn't even sure what that word elemental meant. All I knew is that was the only word I had to describe what I had just seen, this flame and sound moving across the room. And my friend had seen it too, and both of us were just in this moment of wonder, and as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I thought, this was years ago, I thought, doesn't that word elemental also mean fairies, which is exactly the game that we had been playing? And when I looked down at the area in the room in which it occurred, I realized that that is exactly where we had been with his niece when we had gotten so deep into the fantasy play that she had to pull back out. To me, this was emblematic of the fact that just by spending time with children and with our inner child opened this doorway to perception, to something I have literally never seen before. So if this material is tugging at something inside of you, if you're feeling deeply inspired by this, then I invite you to check out my Herbs for the Otherworld course, where we go deeply into this topic of what is the otherworld and how do we connect in this time of the thinning of the veil. So now I'd love to hear from you. What are some of your rituals that you undertake this time of the year? And do you have a connection with the elementals or the fair folk? Leave me a comment below. I'd love to start this discussion with you. No matter how you choose to honor this time or work with the unseen elements of nature, know that you are fully supported in doing so, and that there are so many allies here to help you, just beyond the veil.